Ghana's Minister for Works and Housing, Samuel Atta Akyea, has inaugurated a National Housing Committee on Affordable Housing to address the country's housing deficit, which he says is currently at 2 million units. Felix Ograh, Managing Director at Yorke Properties, joins me to evaluate Ghana's new housing strategies. Felix, glad to have you on the show this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, what's failing and what's missing? How did Ghana get here?
Well, basically, you could attribute the factors to years of neglect by successive governments. Successive governments ought to have been, moving at a certain pace, but unfortunately, that hasn't happened. Currently, we have a housing deficit of about 2 million housing units, as you've already mentioned, and we ought to have been developing at a rate of about 50,000 housing units annually. But this hasn't happened, and that's how come we find ourselves at this point in time with this huge deficit.
Now, are you saying, Felix, that the government's policy over the past few years aimed at revamping the economy has totally neglected housing?
Well, successive governments have more or less paid lip service. If you go through the various regimes that we've had over the period, you realize that each government comes with all manner of ideas, all manner of policies as to how to improve the housing sector. Unfortunately, at the end of their tenure, you realize that there isn't much really to put a thumb on. You've had situations where presidents have gone to cut a saw to start mega projects. Unfortunately, it turns out in the end that those projects never see the light of day. And so, yes, it's one thing paying lip service, and it's another thing ensuring that what your plans, are on paper actually get executed. As a political talk, it will only remain political talk until real, tangible action, gets underway in respect of those policies. So yes, I would say in my assessment that governments over the period perhaps had the best of intentions. Unfortunately, their intentions haven't yielded much results. Some started, I must admit, but unfortunately, they didn't get far. And that's how come we are where we are. And for us to get out of this current situation, it will need the political will. It will need a government that has the will and the wherewithal to say that, look, this is a major challenge, this is a major problem, and therefore I want to deal with it.
Now, Felix, if need for political will, like you said, obviously, now if policy inconsistencies across government has now led Ghana to the housing deficit of about 2 million units, obviously now reports say that the country would have to build about 190,000 to 200,000 housing units every year for the next 10 years to bridge this housing deficit gap, and it's expected to cost about $3.4 billion US, amounting for 200,000 units. Can Ghana afford this?
Definitely, Ghana if you talk about Ghana from the government angle, definitely government cannot have the money to fund this. But that's where there is the need to bring in the private sector. Government is supposed to provide an enabling environment so that the private sector can come in. You're talking about housing, start from the land sector, which is bedeviled with a lot of challenges. Government will have to step in there. You have multiple sale of lands and all manner of criminal, activities going on in the land sector. Which private person is going to come and then pump in a lot of capital if they know that the very land for development, is going to run them into problems? So government, that's why I'm saying that government must provide an enabling environment. If it's about capital, you have a situation now where most financial institutions, their mortgage portfolio keeps shrinking because the legal regime will have to be, looked at. We need to take a second look at our legal regime in terms of our mortgage financing. So these are the things that government ought to step in and take a bold step in addressing. No, we don't expect government to come and inject money in excess of 3 billion United States dollars. But once the enabling environment is created, the private sector will then be attracted to come in and then inject the necessary capital definitely you need the private sector, no doubt about that. But
absolutely.
Government
Talking public-private sector collaboration, like you have so repeatedly emphasized now, Ghana says it plans to set up about 1 billion Ghana cedis mortgage and housing finance to leverage private capital. Are they making definitive steps and moves in this regard?
Well, until real concrete steps are taken, it will remain at the level of political talk. Like I mentioned to you earlier, we've had situations where past governments have also come up with such lofty ideas, but in the end, not even a single housing unit was built. And so many will be quite skeptical about this. If it works out, that'll be good. We will all welcome it. But until we see real tangible steps, it remains at the level of political talk because we've gone that route before. I've mentioned already that you've had a situation where even the president of the republic has gone cutting short, and unfortunately, at the end of the day, the project never saw the light of day. So with such an experience, we can only wait and expect that the government to take real concrete steps. As for committees and inauguration of boards and all that, it's the order of the day in many African countries. But until we see real tangible steps, at this point in time, I'll be a bit skeptical. But I can only hope and expect that they walk the talk because we have a serious challenge on our hands and we ought to deal with it and deal with it in a decisive manner. We need leadership that is swift, leadership that recognizes that indeed this is a challenge and they ought to put the politics aside and really move in a direction that will engender confidence in the citizenry and say that, look, our government is serious, and more so the private sector who hold the money. The private sector, government must act in a manner that will convince them that it's not just mere political talk. They really mean business, so that will serve as an attraction to help enable them bring in the capital that is required to undertake this venture.
Felix, moving away from talking committees and setting up committees and actually taking tangible steps. The latest step by the government of Ghana actually is the fact that it set up a national housing committee like we spoke about. And then it's given that committee up until October 2020 to find solutions to Ghana's housing deficit. We already spoke about earlier, is Ghana able to fund building the required number of units per year for the next 10 years to be able to fill this gap? Now, bringing it closer to a 2020 deadline, is this feasible?
Definitely, for me, that I have an issue with the timeline. We already know the challenges. It's all about implementation. We are not now going to reinvent the wheel. We know the challenges on the ground, and therefore you don't need up to October 2020 to come up with solutions or ideas or proposals as to how to arrest the housing situation. The challenges are already known to us. All we need is decisive leadership to say that, look, these are the challenges. We should take X, Y, Z steps to resolve those challenges. So for me, taking that time period to come up with solutions, we don't need that. The problems are already known. So all we need is a team. I would have expected that this team will be charged with the responsibility of saying that, look, these are the challenges. We're taking X, Y, Z. We're giving you maybe the next 3 months, the next 4 months. Come up with practical, concrete steps as to how we will come up. October 2020 for me is a non-starter because we have elections in December. December 7, 2020, we are going to the polls. So ask yourself, if you come up with whatever proposals by October 2020, what time period is left for the government to implement them? Definitely, the government will be in an election mood. It would have no time to even pay attention to whatever recommendations will come up. So for me,
you do not see that as working out. Thank you very much for your time on the show this afternoon, Felix.
Thank you for having me.
Felix Ograh is a managing director at Yorke Properties.